David Carter leaned back into the gleaming black leather chair in his top-floor office, a glass-walled room that reflected the entire city below. The soft yellow light cast a surreal glow, much like the feigned silence he was deliberately creating. His eyes barely open beneath slightly trembling lids. His lips were pressed into a thin line, his breathing steady, as if he were deep in sleep. But inside, a storm of suspicion was raging. Across the room, the heavy iron door of the safe had been left ajar, revealing thick stacks of cash glittering under the light. It was a clear challenge, a test of faith that David had set with his own bitterness. David was not an ordinary man. At 47, he was the CEO of Carter Holdings, a corporation that had created thousands of jobs. He had been admired and praised in the press as a self-made success story. But a few months ago, his closest associate, a man he had trusted more than family, had secretly embezzled a massive sum, leaving David with not just a financial wound, but a shattered sense of trust. Since that day, he saw deceit behind every smile, saw outstretched hands not as a gesture of greeting, but as an attempt to snatch something away. Perhaps that was why, instead of enjoying his luxurious life, he was now lying here, pretending to sleep, to see if a single shred of integrity still existed around him. The office door opened quietly. Maria, the company's janitor, stepped in, wearing a faded uniform, carrying an old bucket and a few cleaning supplies. Beside her was a small boy, about 7 years old, in a faded but clean t-shirt. This was Luis, Maria's only son. In the cold yellow light, the image of the mother and son silently entering the lavish office was like two shadows that had wandered into a world not meant for them. Maria bowed her head to the empty room, though she knew no one would respond. Her steps were hesitant, her eyes avoiding the expensive paintings on the walls, as if a long glance would be a crime. Luis, however, looked around in wonder, his curiosity piqued by everything, his clear eyes reflecting the metallic glint from the open safe. Through his slitted eyes, David saw that moment clearly. He saw the boy's gaze fix on the stacks of money, saw his small hand tighten around his mother's, as if wanting to ask, "Mom, why is there so much money?" Maria leaned down and whispered, "We're just here to work. We don't touch anything. Do you understand?" Her voice trembled with a sense of unease, like someone walking on forbidden ground. The air in the room grew thick. A man who had once been the center of every party now lay motionless, his mind in turmoil. He waited, he watched, he wanted to know. Did integrity still exist? Or was it all an illusion that would vanish the moment a child's eyes fell on money? Have you ever witnessed a child facing temptation and wondered, what will they do next? Perhaps you're asking the same question as David right now. If you're feeling just as curious, maybe leave a comment. Your thoughts might just illuminate this story in an unexpected way. Maria began to clean a corner of the room, not daring to glance at the leather chair where the CEO was sleeping. Every movement was careful, as if the slightest noise would earn her a reprimand. She had worked here for 3 years, but was always treated like air. The office workers would pass her without a greeting. Many would even make sarcastic remarks. If only you could clean up the messes in your own life so easily. Maria would just bite her lip and remain silent, because she had no right to speak up. In this place, she existed only to clean up what others left behind, while she herself was treated like a stain that could never be removed. David saw it all. And deep down, he remembered the days when he, too, had been looked down upon, pushed aside. But the recent betrayal had choked the compassion out of him, leaving a cynical, cold man, willing to test even a child. Luis let go of his mother's hand and walked slowly toward the walnut desk, where the bills were clearly visible under the light. Every muscle in David's body tensed, his heart pounding in his chest. He feigned sleep, but every cell in his body was screaming, "What is the boy going to do?" There are moments that can change a lifetime in just a few seconds. This was one of them, And if you've ever been through a situation that made you lose faith in humanity, you might understand why David was sitting here, waiting in agony. If this story is touching a memory of your own, a subscription to this channel would be like a nod of understanding, letting me know that there are many others who have walked that same line of being left on the outside, like Maria, like Luis, and perhaps like you. Luis stood for a long time in front of the open safe, his eyes fixed on the thick stacks of cash, which looked like a paper castle that could change the world with a single touch. David lay still, holding his breath to catch every small sound. Dark thoughts echoed in his mind. He's going to reach for it. He's just like everyone else. People can't resist the pull of money. He had braced himself for disappointment, prepared to see the familiar image of greed, even in a child's small hands. But he never expected what happened next to make his heart pound in a way it never had before. Luis tilted his head, studying the money as if he had spotted something wrong. He didn't snatch a bill, nor did he sneak a glance at his mother to make sure he wasn't being watched. Instead, he stepped closer, his small hands trembling slightly, and then, very gently, he began to pick up the stacks and arrange them neatly. He acted as if it wasn't money, but just pieces of paper that needed to be put back in their proper place. In the lamplight, his tiny movements looked both innocent and solemn. "Luis," Maria whispered in panic, turning to see her son touching the one thing she had never dared to even think about. Her face went pale, her eyes wide, her hands gripping the mop handle so tightly her knuckles were white. "You can't touch the boss's things. Do you know what that is?" She rushed over, about to pull him away, but Luis looked up at her, his eyes clear and untroubled. "But Mom, it was so messy. It's sad that someone so rich would leave their money like this. I just wanted to tidy it up, like you taught me to stack our coins at home." Maria stood frozen, her heart pounding, while David, in his leather chair, felt as if someone had just squeezed the air from his lungs. He couldn't believe his ears, or his eyes. In all his years at the top, he had met thousands of people who would jump at the chance to take his money, had seen greed flash in their eyes at lavish parties. But here, in this room, a 7-year-old boy, the son of a woman the entire company looked down on, was meticulously stacking his money, and he was whispering in an innocent voice, as if he were doing the right thing, something important his mother had taught him. "It's not our money, so we don't take it, but we can help people keep it safe. Luis, stop it, right now." Maria pulled him away, her voice choked with emotion, but the boy just smiled innocently. "Look, Mom, it looks much better now. The boss will be happy to see his money all neat and tidy." David felt a surge of heat in his chest. He had prepared for a script of disappointment, had even considered firing them both if he caught them being greedy. But what he had just witnessed left him speechless, a direct blow to the wall of cynicism he had built around himself. He remembered his own empty eyes in recent nights, as he lay alone in his vast mansion, thinking the world was devoid of honesty. Yet, in just a few seconds, a little boy, with no power, no status, not even a new pair of shoes, had touched the softest part of his heart. The atmosphere in the room changed. Maria was trembling, terrified that she and her son had just committed an unforgivable crime. Luis was calm, as if he had just completed a small, simple task. And David, though still motionless, was a storm of emotions inside. He felt as if he had just seen something he no longer believed existed: innocence. Have you ever thought that, in a world full of calculation, there are still small hands that only know how to do the right thing, selflessly? If you're finding that hard to believe right now, I'm curious to know how you feel. You can share it in the comments, so that I and others can see we're not the only ones moved by such innocence. Maria hugged Luis, whispering for him not to do it again. But the boy's eyes lit up, as if he had just discovered a simple joy. "Mom, I just wanted to help. I didn't take anything." The child had no idea that his small act had just shaken a powerful man to his core, and that it would lead to changes beyond anyone's imagination. David squeezed his eyes shut, trying to maintain his facade of sleep, but tears had welled up at the corners. Inside, a strange voice whispered, "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the world hasn't completely lost its integrity." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, flooding the lobby where tailored suits hurried past, the sharp click of their shoes the only permissible rhythm. Maria stood by the edge of the hallway, waiting for her old cleaning cart, while Luis clutched a thin notebook. People passed by, barely giving the mother and son a second glance. If they did, it was a quick, cold look, as if avoiding a puddle. The elevator doors opened, and a group of managers stepped out, the smell of expensive cologne and hot coffee in their wake. They were all smiling just enough, talking just enough, and then the smiles vanished as they caught sight of Maria's faded uniform at the end of the hall. Maria quickly lowered her head, a bow no one bothered to acknowledge, while Luis, ever curious, looked up at them with an honesty that was out of place. David was walking along the mezzanine, a file in his hand that he didn't need to read, his head slightly bowed, as if deep in thought. But in reality, he was watching everything through the glass, a habit of those at the top, both separate from and seeing everything. The image of the mother and son in the lobby made him pause, the feeling from the previous night a thin needle still lodged in his chest. He remembered the small hands carefully stacking his money, remembered the boy's voice saying, "Keep it safe for them." And a part of him felt ashamed for ever thinking the boy would be like everyone else he had met. Below, a different set of footsteps echoed, firmer and louder, a rhythm familiar to anyone who had worked here long enough. Every secretary in the hallway straightened her back. A few employees quickly adjusted their suit jackets, and conversations mid-sentence abruptly stopped, as if someone had hit pause. Victor Langston appeared, wearing a red tie, his stride carrying an unexplainable chill. At 52, he didn't need to try to command power. Power was in the way he looked at no one, yet everyone had to look at him. Victor walked past the reception desk without a greeting, without a smile. The receptionist kept smiling like a machine. When he saw Maria at the end of the hallway, Victor didn't slow down. Just gave a quick glance, as if at a scratch on the glass, then turned to his assistant. "Who authorized the cleaning staff to bring children here after hours? What kind of image does that project for the company?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was just loud enough for those who needed to hear. Maria tightened her grip on the cart handle, trying to maintain a faint smile. Luis, like any child, sensed something was wrong and clung to his mother's shirt, his eyes shrinking back like a kitten in the rain. From his vantage point, David watched the scene as if it were a stain suddenly appearing on a mirror. He started to walk on, but his feet felt heavy. A discomfort crept into a place he thought had become numb. Before, he had seen these cold currents as part of the machinery of a large corporation. Everyone had a role, everyone stood in their place. But since last night, everything had shifted. In their place now looked like being pushed down, and order now looked like being silenced. In the midday board meeting, with leather chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a large screen, Victor spoke about the next quarter's budget in a flat tone. When he got to operational costs, he paused, looked at the department heads, and dropped a comment like a coin into a deep well. "I propose we revise the night shift regulations. No children, no family members, no exceptions." Someone coughed softly, then fell silent. The head of HR flipped through a notebook and hesitated. "Actually, the current policy allows for extenuating circumstances, as long as it doesn't affect safety." Victor turned his head, a slight smirk on his lips that wasn't a smile. "Whose extenuating circumstances? The company's? Or the people who can't seem to get their lives in order?" The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Eyes darted away from each other, as if afraid of being called out. David remained silent, his thumb rubbing the edge of his file until it burned. He wanted to say, "We're not going to go broke because a child is sitting quietly in a corner." But the words got stuck in his throat. He knew that if he spoke up now, it would just turn into a minor argument, and the outcome would be recorded in the minutes as a routine adjustment. And he hated a routine that stripped away all sense of humanity. As the afternoon wore on, Maria pushed her cart into the employee break room. A few people were still scattered around, the steady clink of spoons against mugs, a few pairs of eyes glancing over before looking away, as if watching a familiar television show. A young employee was laughing with a friend. Then her voice softened when she saw Louis slip in and sit on a chair near the door with his notebook. "Maybe they should find a more appropriate place," someone said, just quietly enough to be considered polite, but just loudly enough for Maria to hear. Maria continued to wipe the counter, her hands moving in a steady rhythm she had practiced her whole life to avoid dropping anything. Louis sat with his back straight, pretending to be busy with his writing, occasionally looking up at the mural on the wall, a painting of a city with no scratches, no people like his mother. Victor walked into the break room with two managers, his voice flooding the small room like cold water down someone's back. "By tomorrow morning, I want a full list of everyone who has accessed the administrative areas after hours, including any special cases." He paused, his gaze not even bothering to lower, still fixed on a coffee machine as if he were talking to it. "We are a corporation, not a shelter." A spoon dropped with a soft clink, then silence. Maria set down her cloth and turned around. "Sir, we only work the night shift, and my son sits quietly in a corner. He won't bother anyone." Victor finally looked at her, his eyes holding hers for a second, just long enough to cut into her pride, before he turned away as if he had just heard the wind. "Rules are rules." The words fell to the floor and shattered into silent pieces. David was passing the doorway and instinctively stopped when he heard Maria's voice. He saw the way she kept her voice calm, the way her shoulders curved in to make herself smaller, as if trying to take up less space to be less of an annoyance to the world. He also saw Louis bite his lip and look down at his notebook, the pencil trembling in his hand. For a second, David saw himself from years ago, a stranger walking into a place he had built, being treated like a passerby. Betrayal doesn't just take your money, it takes your sense of belonging, and now, that feeling was being replayed in a woman who had nothing but her calloused hands, and a child who didn't yet understand the meaning of the word power. The HR department called Maria in late that afternoon. The room was too bright, the smell of paper and ink hidden behind the faint scent of hand sanitizer. "We've received a complaint about you bringing your son to the workplace," the woman behind the desk said in a rehearsed tone, her eyes friendly but her hand resting near a pen, ready to sign any decision. Maria nodded, her throat dry. "I work the night shift. There's no one to watch him at home, and he sits quietly in a corner without touching anything." "I understand," the woman said. And the truth was, she did. Her eyes softened for a moment. "But we have to issue a formal warning, for now." The words "for now" landed like a piece of paper, light, but pressing on Maria's chest like a small stone. As she signed the form, Maria tried to keep her hand from shaking, because she knew that even a single stray mark could be used to say she was unreliable. That night, as the lights in the offices began to go out, and the hallways were filled only with the sound of the air conditioning, Maria and Luis once again pushed their cart to the door of the large office where David usually sat. The room was as grand and cold as ever, but there was something different in the air. A deeper silence, a thicker sense of anticipation. Luis stopped at the threshold, his eyes once again drawn to the wooden cabinet in the corner, where he had once tidied the messy stacks of money. He didn't take another step. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn in his mind by his mother. "Help, but don't touch." Maria walked past him, set down her bucket, and turned her back to the light. Her shadow fell across a part of the floor, small and resilient. Victor appeared as suddenly as an unannounced door opening. He leaned against the frame, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the room as if inspecting a product. "Ah, still working," Victor said. It wasn't a question. Maria looked up. "Yes, sir. I'm almost done." "Good. Because by tomorrow morning, I don't want to see any trace of liberties being taken." He emphasized the word liberties, his eyes pausing for a moment on the notebook by Luis's feet before he walked away, leaving behind the faint, sharp scent of his cologne and a cold trail that ran down the spine of anyone who was near. As his footsteps faded, Luis tightened his grip on his mother's hand and whispered, I can sit in the hallway, Mom." Maria gently shook her head and stroked his hair. "No need. You can sit here, do your reading, and not bother anyone. It doesn't matter where we are, as long as we do what's right." Her words were both gentle and as hard as a stepping stone. David returned to his office later than usual, as silent as a shadow. He stood behind the frosted glass, looking out into the hallway, seeing the mother and son like a tiny dot on a contract with too many clauses. In his mind, two thoughts were at war. One was the weariness of a business owner who was used to letting others handle the small things. The other was the sting from the night before, telling him that if he remained silent, his silence would side with what was wrong. He remembered the feeling of being pushed out of the circle of trust by his old partner, remembered how everyone in the company had looked at him differently after that. Half pity, half caution, that feeling of no longer being myself. He had tried to suppress it with work, with meetings, but today, looking at Maria, he saw it clearly. In the places where you were once irreplaceable, with just one crack, people will act as if you can be replaced at any time. And if a CEO could be neutralized, how quickly could a janitor be erased from the horizon? As Maria collected the trash from the bin by his desk, the rustling of paper was an invisible reminder of everything people throw away. Paper cups, food containers, opinions, and sometimes, people. Luis bent down to pick up a fallen paperclip and placed it back on the desk, a small gesture that was like asking for permission. Maria looked at her son and smiled, a genuine smile that no one in this building had the time to truly see. David leaned against his desk, his hand unconsciously touching the leather armrest. He didn't step out, nor did he turn away. He let himself stand there, listening to the small sounds, watching the small movements, letting something that had been filed away as a subordinate's problem have a chance to become a problem of the heart. As the hallway lights automatically dimmed, Victor's face suddenly appeared in David's mind like a freshly developed photograph. He heard the phrase, "Rules are rules" again. Heard the coldness in the tone, as if applying a law to a wall, not a person. And he suddenly understood that the greatest injustice wasn't in the shouting, but in the cold, subjectless details. The door that closes at just the right time, the frown that makes someone swallow their hello, the temporary warning, placed on a desk like a routine. Injustice doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand still and let the powerless retreat on their own. Maria turned off a corner lamp, and the remaining light softened, like a whisper before the night. Luis packed his notebook into his backpack, slowly zipping it, his eyes scanning the desk one last time to make sure nothing was out of place. He took his mother's hand, and they left the office with steps so light they were almost silent. But in David's heart, those steps were so loud he could no longer pretend not to hear them. He stood up straight, smoothed his suit jacket, and placed his hand on the desk, feeling the cool surface against his palm. No plan was spoken. No order was given. Just a very small shift, like a compass needle, deviating from its old course because of a pull just strong enough. And that shift, once it had begun, would not go back to the way it was. That night, as the city below buzzed with the lights of cars and the noise of bars, the top-floor office remained lit. David sat alone, not in a meeting, not signing documents, just sitting and staring into the darkness beyond the vast glass window. In his mind, the pieces of the past few days were coming together. Maria's bowed head as she signed the warning, Luis's fearful eyes when Victor spoke with contempt, the silent, cold steps of the managers in the boardroom. It all returned like a song, with a single repeating chorus. Silence. And he suddenly understood that it was that prolonged silence that had allowed evil to exist so openly. David got up from his chair, opened the liquor cabinet, and poured a glass but didn't drink. He thought of his former partner, who had betrayed him, thought of how he had left justice to be handled by lawyers and numbers. But this was different. This wasn't about a contract or a stolen sum of money. This was about people being buried in contempt. He knew he had a choice: to continue to lie still, pretending to sleep, just as he had done to test a child, or to wake up and use everything he had to fight back. The next morning, David called Marcus Hale, a man who had been a federal investigator and was now a private consultant for sensitive cases. Marcus walked into the office with a straight posture and sharp eyes that had made many people feel naked. "What makes a CEO like you call me in such a hurry?" Marcus asked, his tone half curious, half certain he was about to hear something big. David told him everything, not leaving out a single detail. From Victor's rules are rules to his attempts to frame Maria and Luis. Marcus was silent for a moment, then let out a small laugh. "Sounds like a man who's used to tormenting others without ever paying the price. Trust me, guys like this always leave a trail." In the following days, Marcus dug deep. Private conversations, old files, complaints that had been suppressed. He returned to David one evening and placed a thick file on the desk. This isn't a one-time thing. He forced 3 black employees to leave their old company. 2 of them sued but were pressured into a settlement. There are also emails he sent, vile jokes he thought no one would ever read. David flipped through the pages, and the more he read, the tighter his chest became. He wasn't surprised, but a wave of indignation made his hands tremble. In his mind, a plan began to form, not a small plan, but a strike that would ensure Victor never got back up. On Friday night, Maria was working her late shift again. The familiar room, the same yellow light, but something different was hidden in the shadows. Victor appeared, looking smug, a gleaming gold-plated watch in his hand. Before Maria could understand what was happening, he had quietly slipped it into her cleaning cart, then called over 2 security guards. "Well, look what we have here," he said loudly, as if performing for an audience. Maria froze. Luis trembled behind her, his eyes wide with confusion. A security guard picked up his phone, about to call the police, but the office door swung open. David walked in, his face expressionless, but his eyes were as cold as steel. Beside him were Marcus and 2 strangers reporters Victor didn't immediately recognize. "Who are you calling, Victor?" David asked, his voice calm. Victor flinched, then quickly regained his confidence. "We caught this employee stealing. I'm just doing my job." David smirked, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Stealing? This watch? The one you put in her cart 15 minutes ago? We have enough footage to show your every move." Marcus held up a tablet, and the image appeared clearly. Victor, leaning down, tucking the watch into a pile of cleaning cloths. Another angle, and another 3 undeniable pieces of evidence. Maria hugged Luis, her eyes welling with tears, but she didn't look away from the screen. Victor's face turned red, and he stammered, "This is a misunderstanding. I was just testing security." But David cut him off. "Testing security by framing a woman and her son to ruin their lives? You call that your job?" One of the reporters stepped forward, holding a recorder. "Mr. Langston, can you comment on these racist emails? Or the fact that you were sued for harassing black employees at your previous company?" Victor was stunned, sweat beading on his forehead. David stood still, his eyes locked on him. No longer a CEO protecting an employee, but a man who had decided not to show any mercy. You think this company is yours, but it's not, Victor. This place belongs to the people who work with real sweat, not a place for you to spread your contempt to satisfy your ego. And I will not let you make anyone else bow their head again. In that moment, the atmosphere changed. The silence was no longer fear. It was a verdict hanging over Victor's head. Maria held Luis's hand tighter, feeling that this time, someone was on their side. And David, after years of living in cynicism and coldness, felt a warmth in his chest, not from anger, but from a pure determination to bring justice. Have you ever witnessed a powerful person who thought they could trample on anyone suddenly be dragged into the light? If you have, you'll understand how powerful this feeling is. And if this story is making you think of a face, an experience of your own, maybe subscribe to the channel to join me, because perhaps we all need more moments of justice like this in our lives. The heavy office door swung open for the second time that night. This time, it wasn't David or Marcus, but two police officers in dark blue uniforms. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the polished floor, clear, firm, and unmistakable. Victor froze, the hands that were used to commanding dozens of managers now trembling slightly. He forced a smile, his voice shaking. This is a misunderstanding, a setup. I'm the executive vice president here. You can't. His words were cut off by the calm but resolute voice of an officer. Mr. Victor Langston, you are under arrest for slander, discrimination, and conspiracy to harm an employee under your supervision. You have the right to remain silent. End saying. Maria hugged Luis tightly, feeling as if she had just woken from a nightmare. The boy looked up at his mother, then at David, his eyes bright with surprise. Luis didn't fully understand what had just happened, only that the man who had scared his mother for so many days was now being bound by the ropes of justice. David walked over, knelt down, and placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. No one is ever allowed to make your mother feel scared again. You remember that, Luis. And the reporters captured every moment. The flash of their cameras was like small lightning strikes, illuminating Victor's pale face. He was led away, still muttering meaningless threats. But the name Victor Langston, once a symbol of power in the company, was now just a sensational headline for tomorrow morning. In the cold light, the image of him being handcuffed and dragged out of the building was an ending that had been written long ago, just waiting to be revealed. That night, David sat with Maria and Luis in his office. The cold yellow light was gone, replaced by the soft glow of a few small lamps. Maria's voice trembled. I really don't know what to say. Thank you, sir. Thank you for standing up for us. David shook his head. Thank me? No, Maria. The person who woke me up was your son. He looked at Luis and gave a rare smile. This boy showed me something I thought I had lost forever. Luis was shy, fiddling with the corner of his notebook. I just wanted to tidy up. His innocent words softened the air in the room, leaving a comfortable silence that all three of them needed. In the following weeks, the company was in turmoil. The news of Victor's scandal spread through the media, along with the images of his late-night arrest. The board of directors held an emergency meeting and, for the first time in years, voted unanimously to fire a senior executive. They had no other choice. The evidence was too clear, the public outrage too strong. But what resonated more than Victor's downfall was the story of a janitor and her young son who had been vindicated, protected, and respected. David quietly signed an order to increase Maria's salary, but he didn't stop there. He established an internal scholarship fund, starting with sponsoring Luis's education. When Maria found out, she was so choked with emotion she couldn't speak. David simply replied, "This isn't charity. This is the fairness that you and your son deserve." Luis went back to school with new shoes, his eyes radiant. He told his friends about the time he helped the boss stack his money, but never bragged, just spoke with the natural innocence of telling a story about something he did at home. Maria started coming to work with her back straighter, no longer stooped over. In the company, many employees began to look at her differently. Some even started to greet her as she passed. They were small things, but to Maria, they were more precious than any bonus. As for David, during a company-wide meeting, he mentioned Maria and Luis's names for the first time in front of hundreds of employees. He didn't go into the details of the incident, only said, "There are people who remind us that honesty and kindness still exist, and when we forget that, we lose not just our business, but the best part of ourselves." The entire room was silent, and then applause broke out, not for his words, but because people felt he was speaking the truth, unlike the empty speeches they were used to hearing. 3 months later, Maria was promoted to a new position, head of the cleaning staff. But it was really the first step in a long-term plan David had for her. He knew this woman wasn't just capable of holding a mop. She had the character and integrity to manage, to lead others, and he was ready to create a path for her to walk. That evening, when Maria and Luis stopped by the office to thank him, Luis shyly handed David a crayon drawing, a man in a suit, next to a woman holding a mop, and a smiling boy. Above the drawing, Luis had written, "My hero." David looked at the drawing for a long time, then gently shook his head. "Luis, the real hero is your mother. As for me, I'm just a man who learned how to trust again." Maria turned away to quickly wipe her eyes, not wanting her son to see her cry. As time went on, the story of Maria and Luis spread beyond the company. Some newspapers wrote articles. A television channel came for an interview, but for David, what mattered wasn't the media attention, but the quiet change in the company's culture. People started to pay more attention to each other, to offer simple greetings, and the contemptuous glances slowly disappeared. One late afternoon, David stood by his glass window as usual, but this time he no longer felt separate from the world below. He saw Maria leading Luis out of the building, the two of them laughing and talking. The simple scene brought him a strange sense of peace. He realized that justice isn't just about punishing the bad, it's about protecting the good so it can exist, so it can grow. And perhaps all of us need a moment like the one David had, when a small hand tidies up a messy pile of money, to remind us that the world has not lost its kindness. It's just that sometimes we have to be brave enough to open our eyes and look again.